Hi, everyone. Happy Friday. Welcome to Talking Data Equity for Friday, July 28th, 2023. I'm Heather Kraus, and I am very, very excited about Talking Data Equity today. Talking Data Equity is an informal gathering that we all count hosts, but it's certainly made up and made possible by all of you, the whole extended data equity community. And if this is your first time, welcome. You're in for a huge treat. And if this is not your first time and you're a regular, welcome back. And you're in for a huge treat. We do record these informal gatherings so that we can share them on our We All Count Data Equity Community Forum. I put a link to that in the chat. And that is so that people who want to share in the learnings and share in the conversations but can't attend right at noon Toronto time can watch the video, can catch up, can share the video with their colleagues, and most importantly, can ask questions and make comments. And that's true of everything in that community forum. You can always ask questions or make comments in any of those sections. It's not a membership site or anything like that. It's open to you to utilize at any time. And I think I'm not going to talk too much more other than to say the point of Talking Data Equity is to create a space where anybody from any country, any sector, any level of comfort with data, but who is interested in figuring out concrete, practical ways to embed equity in the way that they're using or making decisions with data, has a place to go where they can exchange concrete, practical ideas, feel encouraged, compare successes and challenges, and remember that you're not alone in this process at all. So that's why we do Talking Data Equities. And today we have a special guest, and our special guest today is Dr. Lashawn Richburg-Hayes. And Dr. Richburg-Hayes, when I asked what they wanted me to say for their biography, said she was going to have that covered. So I will just say that I've had the privilege of knowing Lashawn for a number of years now, and don't have enough time to say how much respect, how much admiration I have for Dr. Richburg-Hayes, both in the level of work and research that they do and in the way that they do it, living, breathing example of why excellent science and equitable science are in fact the same thing, because that is what Lashawn does all day, every day. So generous with her time to be willing to spend this hour with us. So I am going to stop talking so that Dr. Richburg-Hayes can have the rest of the time. And we're going to do the logistics the same way we always do it. Dr. Richburg-Hayes is going to show some slides, share some of her ideas and stories. While she's doing that, we ask that you remain on mute and feel free to ask questions or put comments into the chat. And then after the slide part is done, that's when we'll have an open Q&A, and you can unmute yourself at that time period if you want. Okay, thank you so much, Lashawn. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Heather. I'm really excited to present. I love Talking Data Equity Fridays. For one, we don't have meetings on Fridays, so I can really focus. But for two, it's this unique sort of crowdsourced group of people with the same interests. So I have learned so much from all of the speakers, and you, of course, Heather. You will see a lot of my adaptations in this presentation. But I hope that some of what I say will be helpful and useful for other people. Let me give the caveat that this is really my journey. This is not, I don't think there is one way to implement equity in our work. But how it's done reflects who you are. And I hope by the end of this hour, you all have one more data point to support your belief anyway, because I believe I am talking to the choir, that we all believe this because we're here. But if you need another data point to convince your colleagues or clients or funders, let me be one. So what I want to talk about is a little background and how my journey to incorporating culturally responsive and equitable evaluation principles happened. Some lessons I learned, and some recommendations. And I'll also go into some detail about how I've implemented CREE in one project. I thought I could cover two, but I think there's just too much here. So we'll see. And if there isn't too much here, then we will have more time to discuss, which is great. So I learned about culturally responsive equitable evaluation when I was trying to solve a different problem. So I was working on a randomized control trial of an education intervention. And we were, I think, 2 or 2.5 years into the study. It was a 5-year study, and things were not going well. It was an intervention that involved case management. So it was on a campus, community college campus, and case managers needed to work directly with students. It was going to be a smaller case management caseload than normal. So for those who don't have context, community colleges generally have advisors, but there's one advisors to 800 or 1,000 students. So any individual student is not really getting sort of one-on-one close attention. So this program was geared to give a ratio of 1 advisor to 40 students. So this is really sort of boutique. But what was happening was the advisors kept quitting. The director of the program also kept quitting. It was turnover. There were months before the new directors were replaced, let's say 5-6 months. So you can imagine if a program is operating daily, there was leadership transitions. And so I was required to go to a conference that was about equity. And I learned a few things. So I'm going to tell you about that journey in a few minutes, but before I begin there, you need to know some background about me. So I asked Heather not to give my background because it's pertinent to the story and everything else that comes. So I was born in the Bronx in the 1970s. This is a picture of the Bronx in the 1980s. This is not a picture of where I lived, although it is pretty close. This building looks so familiar to me, and maybe that was the style in the Bronx in the 60s. Yes, I see someone, woohoo, New York. And for those who don't know, it is not Bronx, New York, it is the Bronx, New York. The article is required. So I grew up in the Bronx. I was the last of 5 children, but the oldest of up to 6 children. So my mom became a foster parent when I was 9 or so, and she had the brilliant idea to make sure all of the foster children were younger than me. And so at some point there were seven children in the house. This is useful information because if I come across as an oldest child and very bossy, it's because I've had this interesting experience of being the baby, but then being in charge. And so my older siblings eventually viewed me as bossy as well. And they're 20 years plus older. In terms of education, I went to middle school in an area where I walked down a block like this most days because I was too shy to take the bus. I went on to get into Stuyvesant High School, which was a specialized high school in New York City. I was almost permitted not to go because my father thought Catholic schools were better than public schools, all public schools. And I think it took a monk to convince him that, no, this school was not the same. She needs to go. I got in, there's a competitive exam. I got in, I want to say, by the skin of my teeth. I didn't know what this school was. The monk gave me an exam book and said, you should study that with no other guidance. And I studied it, and to this day, I don't know why, because I had no context, but I got in. And that was an illuminating experience. I was there when there were many more Black students than there are today. I then went to Cornell University. I graduated in 3 years. I did not walk because I was expecting on my graduation date with my daughter. I then went on to earn my economics doctorate from Princeton. And I've been working in evaluation basically since then. So I've been working in evaluation for over 22 years, mostly working for evaluation firms. So I spent 17 years working for MDRC, which is a nonprofit social policy organization. Most of my work there was conducting randomized control trials. I then moved to a small woman-owned evaluation firm based in Arlington, Insight. And I've been at Insight for 5.5 years. We were recently acquired by Westat, so hence the Westat Insight. I identify as a Black person first, and a woman generally only when I'm in the company of Black men. I've been married for 27 years with my husband for 33, and I'm the mother of 3 children, a daughter and 2 young Black men. 29, 24, 17. So this seems like a lot of detail, and it is. And I'm telling you this detail because it places what I share in context. And that's one of the big points that I want to get across today, that context matters, and that you as a researcher are a research tool. You are not coming in unbiased. You are not objective. And like other tools, there's variance around you. So you're also not always consistent. So understanding who you are, your background, and your experiences is super important. So I hope you see that. So now back to this conference and the problem I was trying to solve with this terrible management. So that's how I was thinking about the problem with my community college project. It's management issues. And here I'm doing a randomized controls trial. So I've got internal validity. These things are happening outside of my study. It's affecting my study, but it's management. And I can't tell an institution how to run their institution or their program because I'm just the evaluator. It was so intense what was going on with this program that I did not want to go to this conference, but I was required because I was the PI on the grant and the PI was required to go. So I thought, okay, maybe this could be a useful way to try to figure out my management issues. So one of the activities at this conference was to give a problem at a round table and talk to the people at the round table about your problem and solicit feedback. It was like an icebreaker. So I shared my problem, and a researcher from NYU said, oh, what you have is institutional racism. I should give more context for this. This is back in 2018. And I'm like, what? I'm an economist. And so as you know, economists think about discrimination in a very narrow way. I had not heard someone say in polite company, institutional racism. And I was just sort of perplexed. So I spent the remainder of the conference trying to track this academic down to explain to me more. What do you mean? Where can I look to study? Who can I talk to about this thing? But I never caught up with him. But what happened was there was a session at the conference about and the whole conference was about inequality. It was about inequality. And so I went to the session, and it turned out to be a Starburst experiment. And so I'll give you the rules and I'll explain what happened. So the rules were that people just sat around a table, and each of us were given 3 pieces of Starburst, and they had different values, with pink being the highest value. And the rules were that you had to engage in trading with other people to get the highest amount of Starburst. That was winning. You had to hide your Starburst, so you couldn't walk around showing everyone what you had. You had to initiate one-on-one trades. And they had policemen in the room. So if you were talking or you failed to trade, you would be arrested and taken out of the game, in which case you would lose and ultimately fall in poverty, because the Starbursts were resources. So everyone received their Starbursts, started trading. In the first round, I realized that I had 3 pink Starbursts. So I'm at the top of the heap. So I went around, and I'm a good egg. So I followed the rules. I started to trade. And then I quickly realized, oh, I have got the best hand here. I have no incentive. And so I continued to walk around, but I didn't trade because I didn't want to be arrested. So at the end of the first round, the facilitator tallies up where everyone lands. Turns out I'm in the wealthy group, and most people are in the poor group, with a smattering of people in the middle group. So he says, okay, I'm going to help the other people. So he comes to the wealthy group and he says, you guys, you did so well. Such great strategy. I saw you all, just amazing. He goes to the middle group and he says, you guys, you tried, and you're making progress. You're in a really good place, but don't give up. He goes to the poor group. He says something to the effect of, you really should pay attention to what those people over there are doing, because they're doing a really good job. They're trading really strategically. And if you follow what they're doing, you could do better next round. I really believe in you, something like that. Next round occurs. Same thing. I realize, oh, this is a stacked game. Oh my gosh, I am not trading. I'm walking around, I'm not talking, I'm not trading, and I am thinking, oh, I'm cheating, but there's no incentive. And I know it's a piece of candy, but I don't want to lose. I'm also very competitive. So the end of round 2 happens, and the groups are formed again. There are fewer people in the poor group, but there are many more people in the middle group, and the wealthy group is about the same. And so the instructor goes around again, giving encouragement. And he says, because to the wealthy group, you guys have done so well, you get to make a new rule. And so we in the wealthy group were like, oh my gosh, this game is stacked. I'm an economist. I'm like, oh my gosh, I know exactly what's going on here. And yet I do not want to trade. I am not going to be altruistic. I feel terrible, but I'm not going to do it. And so we make this rule where we change one value of the Starburst, not the pink ones, mind you, the lowest value Starburst to a higher value, so we can maintain our position and other people can move. We implement this rule. After this game, I was so devastated. And I see that I'm triggering some people in the chat. I was near tears in a professional environment, because you've seen my background. You've seen where I've come from. I was never put in a situation for which I was in the top group. So I know what it feels like to be in the poor group. And if I had been assigned there, it would have been like, okay, I understand what this is. I know what's going on. But I wasn't. And I had so many conflicting feelings about, well, what does this mean for philanthropy? What does this mean for society? Can this capitalistic society ever be reformed? Because there's absolutely no incentive to share. I won't share a piece of candy. I think I'm a good person. But this is the structure, this is the system, this is the incentives. And so I realized systems govern outcomes, right? Every system is perfectly designed to get the result it gets. And for us to believe otherwise is problematic. My behavior was rational given the incentive structure that I was answering to, and everyone else's behavior was rational as well. There were more poor people being arrested and put in the corner than any other group because they realized the deck was stacked and they didn't want to engage. And so they started talking and protesting, and the facilitator was quick to signal that they should be removed. And so when you think about people from low income backgrounds not engaging or not participating, that is a rational response to a system that is not geared to be fair. And the other thing I realized in this activity was that what role do I play as a researcher if I'm trying to help alleviate poverty through studying programs, and I'm wanting those programs to be taken up, and I'm not looking at the system, and I'm not thinking about these things outside of my internally valid RCT, how am I complicit? How am I contributing to the very thing that I want to get rid of? So I was very shaken, and I went on a mission to learn about institutional racism, to learn about what's written, to learn how to alter my project that was already in, it was 2.5 years in, a 5-year grant, alter my project to be more cognizant of these things that I had not been thinking of. And that is what I want to share with you. I learned later that this Starburst experiment is actually a simulation. It's been going on since 1970. If you have not experienced this, I hope that I've given you enough to get the visceral feel. And I hope that everyone at some point is allowed to experience this game. They are having some colleges and professors are playing this game in their policy classes, which is fabulous. Oh, someone got this in their doctoral program. Kudos. I think we really lack opportunities to be put in someone else's shoes, someone else's perspective. It is easy to sort of demonize people when you don't think about their actions from their point of view. And so I am saying, if I had been put in a poor group, I'm not sure I would have gotten much from this exercise. I don't think they targeted anyway, but I needed that. Because of who you guys are, I've got some links for you about this game. So we recently at Westat played this game online. This game was created by Gary Schertz, and his son is still running the company, and they've created an online version that seems to give the same sort of icky feelings as the in-person version. So I encourage you to check that out. There are several papers written about this simulation if you want to read about it. And people have also developed teaching guides and questions associated with this simulation. So there's a lot out there. Okay, so I eventually learned, yeah, racism is systemic. And you think I would have known that given my background, right? But no. And I have since learned that many people have internalized this American ethic of pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And if you've not succeeded, you didn't try hard enough. I really embodied that. But our country is built on a history, and that history has not gone completely away. And so we need to be cognizant about racism being systemic and calling a spade, which is something that I was reluctant to do. So thank you again, Heather, for allowing me to present, because I feel like since I've had this experience, I want to shout it to anyone who will listen that your perspective is biased. There is no objectivity. And if you were in a different perspective, you might have different behavior. And it just gives more credence. I had already had this belief, but I hadn't experienced it, that if you are properly incentivized, almost anyone will do anything. It's about the incentive structure. And I've had people argue with me about that, but this, with some candy, made it all real. So I'm a real advocate of helping people experience this. The other thing I learned, I knew this, but this helped me be more clear in my work, that racism does not require people to have racist beliefs. And that's super important, because some people will just shut down at the conversation because they take it personally as if they're being labeled. I identify as Black. I identify as coming from a low income household. I'm not low income now, but I still have tendencies that are connected with how I grew up. And so if you ask me, and when I come to a situation, this is how I'm approaching it. And yet I did this thing. How could that happen? I think the incentive structures were such that it encouraged my behavior. This last point is also pretty obvious. Everything, economics, politics, societal expectations, ideology, they are all partially influenced by the placement of people in racial categories. They're reinforcing the very system that we may want to dismantle. And I say may want because there are parts of this system that benefit people. And that's the part that people are very reluctant to acknowledge. And so what I mean by that is we all have privilege. We have privilege in some ways. It's not the case that there's a group without privilege completely, and then there's groups with. It's a mixture. And I think that's really hard for us to grasp because we like things simple and easy. This is really important. This was a really important point for me to recognize, that low income has many factors. So it's not necessarily a personal individual character flaw. It is reflective of a lot of different things. And so if we're doing RCTs or any study for that matter, and we're not thinking about the other factors that influence those outcomes, we just want to stay in this box, we have missed the bulk of the variation that's affecting students or whatever it is that we're studying. Again, speaking to the choir, because everyone here is on the same page. But research and data are not objective. And I see the time and I'm already running out. So I'm going to tell you the story now instead of later. In this project that I was describing about an academic success program for community college students, I didn't mention that the program was targeted for males of color. In this project, I tried to implement more, someone says talk forever. I tried to implement more CREE principles. And one of the CREE principles that we implemented was to share early findings. We decided that, okay, in this, we're going to now share our early findings with the administrators, with the case managers, and with the students. We've never done this before, but we want them to co-interpret the data with us. We want them to see how things are going early, so maybe they can course correct. We decided to take a continuous improvement approach to an RCT, which I have not heard of ever being done, but we started to be explicit. We talked to our program officer about it at IES, and he was on board. So we were being transparent about all of these things. So we were really concerned about sharing early impact. So to put this in context, this is random assignment, we're doing recruitment. It's targeted to African-American males at a community college. Recruitment for RCTs is really hard. It's hard, period. But when you're dealing with populations that are not the majority, it can be even harder. So it was very hard. And we ended up recruiting 6 cohorts, but we were sharing findings for only the first 2 cohorts, which was super early in the project. So we were very concerned. So we spent a lot of time going over the code, the cleaning data, making sure that the impact estimates were right, that the standard errors were properly calculated. We were like focused. And we put the findings in a deck, but we put the SAS variable label next to it so we could go back and check the code, and the variable label was something like DR spring underscore, whatever. Not helpful in understanding what it was. So we have this deck, and everyone is like quality looking at it. We have 3 meetings, one with the provost president, one with the case managers, and one with administrators, case managers, and students. 3 separate meetings, and we had them in that order, and we used the same deck. So I talk about the impacts in these first 2 meetings. I get to the 3rd meeting, talk about the impacts, and before I can finish my discussion of the impacts, a student comes off of mute in Zoom and asks me, why are we looking at failure? And before he could get his question out his mouth, I nearly died inside, because I realized this variable of progress is the proportion of students earning a C or lower. Why are we looking at failure? I just told you this program was focused on academic success. And I told you all of this background about where I'm from and what I'm thinking about and what I care about. And I let this happen, and I didn't see it until the student flagged it. Okay, so this is a lesson on why you should share early findings with the constituents that it affects. But also it's an illustration that you're not immune just because of who you are from falling into what is in the water all around us. I am convinced that no one on my team is racist. No one in the administration, the case managers, all of whom were males of color. It's not about them being racist and having racist beliefs. The analyst who coded the variable that way, I don't think that's what it was. What I think it was, I think it was that we are so accustomed to thinking about Black males and failure that it did not cause a cognitive dissonance to see that variable. But I believe if we were studying an honors program, no one would have let that pass. I think because it causes cognitive dissonance. How can honors students be failing, right? You would have never let that go. So this is an example of why everyone on your team needs to go to Heather's training about talking about data equity, not just the principal investigators or the vice presidents, your analysts, your researchers. everyone, this needs to be taught in Introductory Statistics 101, because we are bringing ourselves to the math. Okay, you all, I'm sorry, I'm passionate. You are a part of the choir, you agree. But this was a eureka moment for me. So I would love to hear in the chat any examples of decisions that you all have made that's reflective of your perspective, that you found that, oh wow, that was off. So I learned since then a lot about culturally responsive equitable evaluation. And when the pandemic hit and George Floyd hit, I then went into more reflection. What can I do? What can I do? I'm not an activist. I'm not a good speaker. I'm an introvert. I'm nerdy. What can I do within my realm? And then I realized I can do a lot. I can do a lot as part of my daily work. I'm trying to solve social problems. I need to do that better. And that caused me to delve even further into understanding culturally responsible equitable evaluation. That's how I found We All Count. And I realized that at that point in 2020, I was the president of the Society for Research on Educational Effectiveness. And in that role of power and authority, I started a workshop where Heather gave a workshop, actually introductory data equity framework and advancing data equity framework to the SREE membership who are quantitatively minded folks like myself. And I remember we had a pilot, and we were very careful to invite those in our membership who we knew would be opposed to the idea of equity in research because of the equating of that with activism. And so we had a mix of people in the pilot. And I think the best outcome of the pilot was at the end of it, several of those people said, this is just good science. This is not advocacy. In which case that was just even more impetus to continue to spread the word. So I think my life goal at this point is to try to get everyone to understand and do things differently with that knowledge. So how to implement CREE? There's no easy solution. I don't think there is a point, and Heather says this all the time, there isn't a point that you can say, check mark, done, equitable. I think it's a journey, and I think it continues on. And I think it requires self-reflection, awareness, an internal journey in addition to understanding methodology and skills. It's not just skill acquisition. On my part, it's required me to have conversations that I would not have had otherwise. I also want to acknowledge my privilege here. I've been working in the field 22 plus years. I've got some stature. I am a VP of education. I don't have the same fears that I had when I was a new PhD coming out of grad school. So I just want to acknowledge that power is real. But at the same time, there are structures that can constrain the power that you exert. So this is what I'm trying to express is that this is a constant continual journey and lesson. It's going to cause discomfort, but discomfort could be a sign of growth. And you may backslide, and the backsliding may be an opportunity to relearn, remediation. And so I have this quote at the bottom: pain is inevitable, suffering is optional. It is, I believe, a Lance Armstrong quote. I don't advocate Lance Armstrong, but my husband and I were big cyclists, and he would share this all the time. Like, yeah, we're on mile 80 of 100. And you could focus on that, but you don't have to suffer. Like, yes, it hurts, but you don't have to like focus on that. And because the suffering is just making it worse. So yes, this is going to be painful, but it doesn't have to be painful in a way that you're suffering. If you only leave with one thing, this is Heather. We are making choices daily about who to privilege in our research. And in the example that I gave of I want to say that's probably the lowest moment in my career. I privileged a perspective. Our whole team privileged a perspective, and we were not aware of it. Oh, I love that. Someone in the chat dropped a danger of the single story. Absolutely, absolutely. So running out of time, I'm not going to get through. I'm on slide 18 of 40. Okay, so this is problematic. I'm going to talk a little bit about this first program to give you some examples of what we've done. I'm going to speed through it. So this project, the Reframe project, it's race equity for fatherhood, relationship, and marriage programs to empower Black families. I'm a co-PI on this project. The point of this project is to understand the strengths and assets of Black families to develop resources for healthy marriage, responsible fatherhood practitioners that they can use in order to develop programs that are more racially equitable, relevant, and supportive for Black individuals, youth, and couples. It occurred to me when I was putting this together that, oh, wow, this is kind of like a motivation statement, but that's not how we thought about it. But the whole team is on board that the goal of this project is to focus on strengths and assets and not take a deficit view. The other thing that our team was focused on from the start, and I should mention this is a federal project, from the start, we were focused on how the project was implemented, not only what we were producing outwardly, but how we as a team were running the project. And that meant that we were reflecting on our own practice. So one of the things we did before writing the proposal is we took a self-assessment of our evaluation practice. And I'm just realizing I did not give the link to that. But you can Google this. There's an instrument online, which is just helpful for you to think about areas you may be focused on versus not. It gives you a scale for which you could rank. The way that we used it was everyone had their individual report. We put this in Qualitative. It's a REL, a Regional Educational Lab document, so it's in the public sphere. We put it in Qualitative. Everyone on the team took the survey. We did not look at individual responses. We aggregated it to the team level. And then we looked at ourselves as a team to say, okay, where are we lacking relative to where we want to be? And we did that before the proposal so that we could situate ourselves on where our gaps were. And then we did it right before we conducted focus groups with key constituents in the project, because we also wanted to be cognizant that we were doing the work in the way that was in alignment with our values and the culturally responsible and equitable evaluation principles we set out. So here are some of the things we did. We employed an expert work group comprised of academics, professionals, as well as people with lived experience. We used the funding web, but we call it a power web. I'll show you that in a minute. We use the perspective microscope exercise to explicitly have different perspectives develop the research questions. And we conducted some periodic team reflexivity exercises. So here's the Power Web. It's actually in this report that I put the link to. Some things that came out of this discussion, we had this discussion with the expert work group and our funders. We had previously a lot of arrows coming to the research team and very little going out to any other key constituent. We also, it's not shown here, but our original version had Black families, couples, and youth, which was what the RFP described the population. But during this discussion, we determined that no, that is not a homogeneous group. Those are really distinct populations. And so we actually broke it apart. It's shown here together, but we broke it apart. And we had Black fathers, we had Black youth, we had Black mothers, and we had Black individuals. And this was important because we used that breakout to recruit for our focus groups. If we hadn't done that, we might have had underrepresentation of some groups and would have been privileging certain voices over others. So those were two main things that came out of doing this exercise. For the perspective microscope exercise, we again engaged with the expert work group and co-developed the questions and the approaches that would then be used for the stakeholder. Sorry, I am not using stakeholder. That is violent language that I personally am trying to remove from my vocabulary. So key constituents that we would ask them in the focus groups. For our focus groups, we use this checklist from Jory Hall, and let me just drop Jory's book in the chat. We wanted to make sure that the focus groups we led were also exhibiting the CREE principles that we wanted embedded in the project. And so we made sure that our protocol was removed of instances that did not allow full participation or didn't create a space for storytelling. And we decided that we would have two different types of focus groups. One was focused on practitioners with a very structured protocol, and the other was a listening session, which was very open-ended. We use this to help us think about whether those protocols were in alignment. I think the most important thing that we did was we explored our team's positionality. And the way that we did that was with team origin stories. This is something I love. I personally think we did this a year into the project. We didn't do this immediately. Although I got this idea from a staffer at the organization I sit on their board. She uses this with new groups that are being pulled together. The idea is for everyone to share 2 minutes of their experiences and what's influenced your pursuit of the work you're doing. And this is not a CV type introduction. It's more the type of the introduction that I gave. Like, I am from the Bronx. I've got this context. So you've learned so much more about me than you would have ever learned in multiple years of seeing me given that introduction. And it just allows more connection. And so we did this, honor the time limit, focus on whatever you want. And we learned so much about each other as a team that we never knew. One thing that stands out is that we had a woman on our team who identified as an Indian American. She shared how she had grown up in a predominantly white community and how that affected her perspective, and why she was so excited to be on this project that was focused on Black fathers, families, and youth. and working with our project director, who at the time, he has passed away unexpectedly earlier this year, was of African descent and had worked in the fatherhood field for multiple years. So it was just a unique team, and gave space for everyone to bring their full selves. Oh, I will drop that in the chat because this is interesting, but I'm not going to talk about it. I'm going to talk about this social identity map tool. So one of the things we did to help us be reflective. So for the qualitative researchers on the call, you all know this, but as a quantitative evaluator, trained economist, I was not taught about reflexivity. The first time I saw a positionality statement in a paper was probably 2017. And I was like, what is this? Why is this here? And kudos to my colleague, Wilda Rodriguez, who also is an economist, who put that in her paper. And she was like, Lashawn, this is blah, blah, blah. And I was like, oh, people do that? So now I have drink Kool-Aid. I think everyone should do it, whether it shows up in your article or not. I think it's a practice. And so we did this map. I'm going to drop the paper because, as I said, I was not trained in this. So the idea of how to be reflexive, I didn't know how to do it, but there's this excellent paper, Jacobson and Mustava, that makes this a real activity. And so basically there's this tool where you identify the boxes that are pertinent to your project or whatever you're working on, and you can do this individually or along with your team. Think about what this means in terms of your identity. So there's actually 3 tiers. So the first tier is to identify those broad facets of your identity. So what you see here, the family, the age, race, ethnicity, those are broad facets. The second tier is to go beyond these groupings and to think about how these positions impact your life. So as you reflect upon these identities, how do they affect your life? Is it that they represent an oppression or a privilege? The third tier is to go even further and to reflect on the emotions or the feelings that these identities bring for you. So I know this sounds very, very, very theoretical. So here's an example for me. Some of this you already know because I told you in my origin story. Right now, I'm upper middle income, but I was formerly low income. And so in terms of what this means, the second tier, how these positions impact my life, I understand I have privilege, but I'm also very conscious about money. I have a bizarre way of, bizarre way of dealing with things. Like my aunt, who was born in 1938, came to my house and was like, I have never seen someone pour hot water in the jar of honey to get all the little specks of honey out the jar before throwing it away. And I was like, because I was taught not to waste. Like you don't have the luxury of wasting. And so I do this, and I do other things that are bizarre like this, but it's a reflection of my identity. And so what does this mean in terms of the feelings and the emotions I have? I go through guilt for being where I am now versus people I grew up with. I'm really generous. I give ridiculous tips according to my husband. Someone calls me, I'm whipping out the checkbook. It's a good thing that he's the other way, so there's balance. But those are the emotions that it brings up for me. So we did this as a team. People could share what thrivers, guilt. People could share this as a team, or they can hold whatever they want to hold and share the parts of it that they want. But this helped pull us together as a team And it helped streamline conversation. So I don't know if any of you have read the book, The Speed of Trust, but when you have trust, everything just moves more smoothly. And I think this helped everyone just know each other at a different level. So I'm going to stop there because I've given you 2 minutes to ask questions.
I'm sure that I speak for everyone when we say, please don't stop. Please. I think we'll have to have Lashawn part 2, because there are so many expressions of wanting you to continue to share the extremely powerful insights. Yes. So there's unanimous in the chat. We will get you back for part 2, because if there's another example of a piece of research that you still have left in those slides, which you do. All right. So I'll be following up with you afterwards to talk calendars. So we will definitely have a part 2. And does anybody here want to raise their hands and unmute themselves? And I think we probably have time for a question. All right. I think what we are experiencing is most people actually have to go, because most people have back to back. But can you adopt me? So we have a question in the chat, Lashawn. Yeah.
My kids would warn you against that.
Yeah. So Lashawn, I really want to say again what I said at the opening, which is any day that I, I'm like, oh, data equity, does anybody really care? I look to your work. I look to you as a human, and the work that you do is so inspirational, and a really fantastic combination of rigorous research and equitable research. And the way that you share it is just, mind-blowingly awesome and authentic and human, and everyone in the chat agrees with me. So we will post this recording and all of the links that were shared. I highly recommend that you take the time to go through that piece of research that Lashawn and her team did, because it's a great example of the actual concrete practices that Dr. Richburg-Hayes is talking about here. It's one of the best I have ever seen. And so we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you for coming, everybody who attended Talking Data Equity today. We are back next week with a group of community-based researchers from Colorado. So that will be very awesome. And I promise you that we will have a part 2 with Dr. Richburg-Hayes on the calendar as soon as we can both find a Friday that works. So thank you, Lashawn. Have a great weekend, everyone else. And have a great weekend, of course, Lashawn. And I'll see you all next week. Bye, everybody.
Bye.